Right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this next session, which is focused on a fair and just coast. I'm Pamela Buchan. I'm a director of Labour Coast&Country and I lead the coastal subgroup. I've got interests across the coast and its communities as a vice chair of the Devon and Severn Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority, as a port duty holder, a former Plymouth City Councillor and a marine social scientist and founder of the local government Ocean Recovery Declaration. Many of the challenges that are shared between rural and coastal communities, for example, poorer outcomes in health and education, higher levels of deprivation and unemployment, and issues with transport and connectivity, as we've already been discussing today, but how these manifest can be specific to the coast. And there are additional specific coastal issues that are well known to those of us living and working there. Coastal communities face challenges relating to coastal industries such as fishing, energy and tourism, and we lack access to involvement in marine planning and offshore industries. We're also strongly influenced by the physical geography of the coast, including how land and sea are used for developments. Coastal erosion and flooding are increasingly a problem as climate change accelerates, which impacts homes, livelihoods and infrastructure, compounding the existing problems as we look to the future. So to consider how Labour policy should reflect the needs and opportunities expressed by communities of the coast, I'm joined by a panel of speakers from across different tiers of government. Our keynote is MP Anneliese Dodds, who's the Shadow Secretary of State for Women and Equalities and the Stronger Together, working on the Stronger Together policy review. And we'll then hear some reflections from Cornwall County and parliamentary candidate for Truro and Falmouth, Councillor Jayne Kirkham. Then Councillor Peter Byatt, who is the Labour Group Leader at East Suffolk District. He'll be followed by Councillor Rebecca Cooper, who's the Labour Leader at Worthing Borough Council, and finally the Right Honourable Steve Bassam, who is the Co-op Party Rural Commission and on the Lord Seaside Towns Inquiry. So I'll hand over to you, Anneliese, please, for our keynote.
Well, thank you very much indeed. It's really wonderful to be here. I'm so pleased that this conference is now taking place. Of course, it was postponed after the sad passing of Her Majesty the Queen, and really wonderful that we can bring people together again to talk about these really critical issues. And I should apologise that I am in the car. I'm on my way to at least a semi-rural community in Stony Stratford, a market town for Small Business Saturday. So sorry that I'm on the move, but very, very pleased I can be with you. And these issues are very personal to me. I was brought up actually in a rural community in a hamlet in the northeast of Scotland in Aberdeenshire. Many of my family have been involved in different forms of the coastal economy, certainly in terms of the fishing industry. And I know it's really important that Labour is ready to represent people who live in both rural and coastal communities. So it's an absolute honour for me to have been invited to provide this keynote speech today. And I think we all know quite how important it is that Labour is there to speak up for our coastal and rural communities, because they have had such a tough past 12 years. Of course, they were promised a bright future way back in 2010 from the Conservatives, also from the Lib Dems, of course. What have they seen instead? Well, I think all of you from coastal and rural communities know what people have received in those communities. Of course, first of all, they've received 1 million discharges of human waste into our watercourses. That's even just over the last 6 years, many more when you include the last 10. Water companies allowed to pump sewage onto our beaches and into our waters every 2.5 minutes on average, with 90 beaches across our country sullied as a result. We've also seen, of course, a loss of control over our fishing industry, the opposite of what the Conservatives promised. Huge uncertainty since the deal was reached with the EU, and vessels actually tied up due to quotas not being secured and agreements not being reached. We've seen tourism businesses, which were a growing part of our rural communities, a lot of the time our coastal communities, those businesses hit very hard by COVID and the way the government responded to it economically, and many communities still have not recovered from the impact of that period. And of course, unaffordable housing, forcing many young people to move away from the communities where they grew up in our rural and coastal areas. We've seen funding for transport cut. I know that you were talking about that earlier. GPs and dentists stretched to breaking point, and community hubs like village shops, post offices and pubs just allowed to close. And those really important places for local communities and services for local communities simply not there anymore, out of reach for so many people. Of course, to top it all, now we also have the Conservatives' cost of living crisis, the price of energy and the weekly shop soaring, and the dire state of rural public transport forcing people into their cars a lot of the time when they're able to use a car. Of course, many people not able to afford that in our rural communities. For those years, while we've seen that degradation also of our environment, the betrayal of our fishing industry by the Conservatives, our tourism sector being let down, and the Conservatives failing to invest in affordable housing, we've seen people increasingly looking for that alternative in these different communities. And they're looking to us, they're looking to Labour to deliver the change that's so desperately needed. And it's our responsibility very much to deliver that change. And that does mean getting out into the kind of communities that I know many people on this call come from, and that some of the other amazing speakers in this panel come from, places where perhaps people haven't always traditionally voted Labour, maybe only voted Labour in different pockets of those communities, or maybe they haven't voted Labour in those communities for a long time. We've got to understand that there are people in our coastal communities who may in the past have felt that Labour didn't understand them, didn't understand their values or their way of life, the challenges that they face. We've got to meet people where they are and show them that we've got a plan to deliver a much fairer, greener Britain, and that they're going to be critical to that future, that we want to see new opportunities in our coastal and rural communities, that they're fundamental to the stronger economy in particular that we want to build in Britain. And that's why the work of Labour Coast and Country is very important. I want to pay tribute to all the hard work that people on this call are doing to help us win back seats that often we haven't held for decades, or win ones that we've never held before. Now, every single conversation matters. I was in semi-rural area and market towns, you could call them, or certainly areas with a lot of farming industry around them, also fishing industry not so far away. Earlier in the week, I saw how we're actually winning in some of those communities now in a way that we haven't for a long time. We need to keep that pressure up and convince people that we stand up for them. And I would say, first of all, we need to get that message very strongly across to the fishing community. I know there's many people on this call who have been doing that for a very, very long time. As you know, the fishing industry employs about 11,000 people. It plays a huge part in the life of our coastal communities, their identities, and also their sense of themselves. And certainly that's something that I feel keenly with, you know, many people in my family having come from the fishing industry generations ago. The Conservatives really have let these communities down. Labour is determined that instead we're going to repair that damage. We know that for every one job at sea, there are 8 jobs that are supported on land. So we want to make sure that we see more fish landed in our coastal towns across the country, that would create more jobs in local fish markets, in processing and distribution. We want those jobs to be British jobs. We want them to be adding value in our own coastal communities. We also want to make sure, of course, that we tackle the ecological emergency. We need to deal with both challenges, stopping overfishing and stronger marine protection. So that's why we've committed to a robust net zero and nature test for every policy, something that I was very proud of creating when I came into my role as Shadow Chancellor, something that Rachel Reeves, I'm proud to say, has continued as she is our Shadow Chancellor. And we're determined that we will be halting and reversing the loss of marine biodiversity by 2030. We want to make sure that we improve protection for marine wildlife, in doing that actually helping to maintain healthy, sustainable and economically productive fish stocks. But of course, we also need to do more to tackle those who are polluting our watercourses, our beaches and our sea life. And that's why Labour has been very clear that we will bring in tougher rules and enforcement for water companies to clean up our waterways. No more excuses, no more deadlines far, far, far in the future. We're going to act now when we get in to government. And Jim McMahon, who I know has provided a message for this conference, our Shadow Environment Secretary, he's put water companies on notice that Labour won't let them get away with dumping sewage like the Conservatives. Labour will introduce a legally binding target to end 90% of sewage discharges by 2030, so that we have mandatory monitoring of all sewage outlets. We can't continue with impunity as we have at the moment. So we have automatic fines for discharges and a fixed rate charge for any discharge point that is not monitored. That's real action from Labour to clean up our waters. And of course, add on to that our Green Prosperity Plan. That will help to create 1 million new jobs in towns and cities, but also in our rural communities. I couldn't agree more with what was just said. We're going to see those new jobs being created in rural areas through the blue and green technologies that are coming, often through British technology that's being developed in our universities, our research institutes, and small businesses up and down our country. We need to boost that in the future as Labour, and it's only Labour who's got the plan to breathe life back into our countryside and coastal communities that have been abandoned ultimately by the Conservatives. Now, some of those plans were set out, as was mentioned, in our Stronger Together review, the policy review that I've been leading for Labour, working with a number of people on this call, others from across our movement, our trade union friends also. I want to thank everybody who supported that process and for all of your input over the last year. Now we're moving in to a new phase. Our National Policy Forum has been reconstituted with a fresh membership now, and I'm really excited as the chair of that National Policy Forum about continuing to help develop our policy offer for coastal communities and rural communities at the next election. I want to invite all of you to get involved in this year's MPF, both through the stream that's called the Green and Digital Future Policy Commission, but through all of the other streams as well, because issues affecting coastal and rural communities cut right across the gamut of policy development that we need to take forward as Labour. So please do make sure that you get involved, that you get engaged. I think some of our MPF reps may actually be taking part in this conference. Contact them, make sure that your voice is heard. You understand your local communities better than everyone else, and ultimately you know what the challenges are. Tell us what needs to be done so that we can deliver those opportunities and deliver that stronger economy, including our coastal and rural communities at the very, very heart. Tell us how we can make sure what we all want to see, that genuine affordable housing, those genuinely sustainable local transport systems, and those jobs in rural and coastal communities, how we can deliver that in government and do so together, working, of course, with our brilliant councillors, our Labour councillors in those coastal and rural communities. When we work together, we show that it's only with Labour we can build that fairer, greener future that we all want to see. And I'm really delighted to be here giving this speech, but looking forward to the discussion that we're going to have, and above all, to hear from the other amazing panellists. Thank you very much indeed for the invitation.
Thanks so much, Anneliese, and for making the time, and you're obviously very busy Saturday. We really appreciate to hear from you. Can I pass over now, please, to Jayne?
Yes, thank you very much, and it's lovely to be here. I feel really privileged to be here amidst such auspicious speakers. It's great. I am a bit twitchy today because it's Saturday and I'm a parliamentary candidate, so I feel like I should be out banging on doors because, as Sue said earlier, it's really important. It feels really important that some of those voices from Coast and Country are actually heard in Parliament. There are 2 target seats in Cornwall, and I'm going to do a little plug here. Mine in Truro and Falmouth, and next door in Campbell and Redruth. They're very different. Campbell and Redruth is really post-industrial, a long way post-industrial, more than the north. And mine is younger, university educated, Remain, so very different. But mine is also very rural and very coastal. So it's a real mix. And it would be fantastic to be up there in Westminster, because at the moment we have 6 Tory MPs in Cornwall and a Tory council, and we really do not have a voice. We need a voice. So I feel that the Southwest has been politically overlooked for levelling up as well for quite a long time. So much has been focused on the north. But here we have had, and I'm going to say this now, I'm going to abuse my position as a speaker here to bring this up, but in the last day or two, we've had a county deal that has been effectively foisted on us from central government. We had Dehenna Davison down yesterday to sign it, even though no one's agreed it, at our spaceport with our Conservative council leader. Now, the idea of that is to basically force a mayor on Cornwall, which will probably, because it will be under first past the post, is more likely to be a Tory mayor. And we feel that that's something that they are trying to do in the shires and in rural and coastal areas at the moment. But the deal is not a genuine deal. It doesn't seem to us. It's £12 million a year of kind of investment capital stroke revenue funding, but it can't be used for services, and there doesn't seem to be an awful lot of actual power that comes with it, apart from maybe some of the adult ed budget. So we have pushed back very hard, because although we do have some fantastic Labour mayors, we're not 100% sure that a mayor is the right thing for Cornwall. And the party have agreed and said at conference that we would be willing to let areas choose their own governance structures. So we've kind of pushed back on that. And also for the fact that we do feel we need genuine, as Rachel Reeves said, deep economic devolution, not just this kind of surface level bribe, which is what we're being offered by the Conservatives at the moment. So we're really pushing that, and we're pushing for a strong devolution deal for Cornwall specifically, because I think, as some of the speakers said earlier, the more local you can get, the better in a lot of ways. So we do feel really strongly about that. Some of the things that Anneliese covered were exactly what I was going to say. Our fishermen down here call him Boris the Betrayer, basically. They've had a terrible, terrible time. I represent the area where the Foul River is, and we have oysters in the Foul River, and shell fishermen have had a terrible, terrible time. Their industry virtually died after January 2020, and they're also struggling with sewage in the water. So that's another thing that I've been pushing, and it was brilliant to come to conference and hear Jim McMahon and also talk to Fergal Sharkey, and that's really helped down here. I've been campaigning a lot on sewage, and it is a cross-party issue as well. The Conservatives have done nothing, but their councillors are furious. We had a cross-party motion last week at our Cornwall Council meeting, very angry with South West Water and the way that we have so much runoff into the water as well. Unanimous, even the Conservatives, the Conservative majority voted for it. So everyone down here is very angry about sewage. It's a massive issue because it affects not only our fishers, but of course our beaches, our tourism, our health and our well-being, because we use them so much. So that's a big issue. But of course, the other massive issue that I must say, I'm going to go through as many as I can before I get told I've run out of time, is housing.
We've run out of time, Jayne, so throw them in very quickly.
Oh, I'll just do this one then. I mean, housing, massive issue down here, mainly because we have enough houses, but we have as many holiday lets and second homes as we do on people on the housing list. So what we are looking for is some real powers, some planning change of use class powers, some licensing and regulation like they do in Scotland, some triple taxation like they do in Wales, to control that second home ownership and see that we can build the social housing and the affordable housing that we really need down here. I'll stop there. Sorry, I had so much more to go through.
Thanks so much, Jayne. Hopefully we'll be able to bring that up in the questions. Can I pass over to you, Peter, now?
Thank you very much, Pam. And just very, very quickly, Anneliese, greetings from Tescandy, who you university with. Jayne, thank you to the people of Falmouth for the gift of a barge of rocks, which has just arrived to boost our crumbling coastline 100 yards from where I'm sitting. Pam, thank you for the Ocean for the Motion, which our council has sitting on at the moment, but we'll come back to it. And that brings me to what we try and do here with the Conservatives in East Suffolk. There's only 7 of us, so with 39 of them, we do try to persuade them to come along and do the best thing. And actually, give them their credit, they do quite often listen and are very helpful. We put a motion last week to contact the Environment Secretary, dear Therese Coffey, about sewage in the water. We hadn't mentioned her in our motion, but the Conservatives tweaked it and wanted us to have a go at her as well. So that was even better. And we did refer to her environmental credentials previously, with her great love of the growing of tobacco and grapevines, which they also thought was quite helpful. Anyway, very, very briefly, obviously, because I know we're short of time, the things that everybody else has mentioned already. But something that I read recently in Lisa Nandy's book, which I'm currently reading, 6 of the 8 commissioners on the National Infrastructure Commission are based in London. That is so telling about what you know, we are Whitehall centric, and I think Aunt Reed mentioned that about us being very, very, you know, centrally ruled. And also Lisa mentioned something about that it should be government with the people. We are sick and tired of things being done to us all the time. And I'm sure you all share that feeling, whether you've got your own Labour councils in places, but it feels all the time as if we are being told what to do rather than consulting at the most basic parish level. And I think one of the reasons this morning was to talk about getting parish councillors involved, and actually we're going to talk about it in the last session about how we can actually get their voices heard even at the smallest parish level. Also, I think it was about the tyranny of the minority, those who are ruling us. Actually, they haven't got the majority of the country behind them. And I think, as you said there, Jayne, about your local council there, actually turning around and standing up against their own government. And I think that is such a key thing, to stand up to what I see as centralised bullying. But as for where we are in Lowestoft, most easterly town in the country, great place to be. It's a town that's been very, very up, very ex-fishing town. We have a problem here because any of you who know June Mummery, who was an MEP, well, Alex will, Mad Mummery, as we like to call her politely, she bangs on all the time about bringing fishing back to this place. It isn't going to happen. So we've now got to go for solar farms, wind farms out at sea. And that's good because we're focusing on that. But it's recognizing that you can't live on memories and heritage for a town on the coast. We can't, all we can do is try and bring in tourism, bring in some industries. But at the moment, we have a wonderful new bridge being built by our wonderful government, and we have a flood barrier being built, for which they've now decided last week that they got the gates wrong. They've got to be 40 metres instead of 28. So they now need something like another 25 million. And the problem is they haven't got that. So what's going to happen to our town because of that? And also, with it being East Suffolk, we cover right the way down. Paul Richards is here from Suffolk Coastal. We cover the Suffolk coast, and that's tremendous. But the erosion that's happening, the environmental damage from here right the way down the coast is significant. And of course, the massive elephant in the room that we have to tread very carefully on is Sizewell C. We know that in the rural areas, they are really around there, they're really concerned. And that's something we have got to be able to listen to people there and find a compromise. And I think otherwise, just one final observation, the government spends 7 times as much on transport for every person in London than in the Northeast. I do like silly quotes, and thank you.
Thanks so much, Peter. Lots of issues raised there. And now it's over to Rebecca.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much for having me. It's lovely to see you. This is my third Labour event of the morning. So my kids have just gone, Mum, you're nearly done. So it's been a lovely morning. I've had a street stall out on our local high street, and then I had a cup of tea in our local church fair. So it's great the things you get to do when you're a politician. It's a joy. But very quickly, you probably all know, but we actually took control of Worthing Council in May. So I'm for almost the first time going to talk about, I guess, the things that you can do as a Labour council on the coast, as opposed to just talking about all the great things that you want to do in opposition. So I'll be very quick because I know we're sort of short of time. So our vision, and we haven't sued the Labour Party here, but our vision before it even got said in the Labour Party was to be the greenest, fairest coastal town in the UK. So, you know, if anybody wants to be sued, we were like, well done, Labour, for catching up with us. So we have a vision to be the greenest, fairest coastal town in the UK. And the things, I'm just going to talk about a few of the things that we've been able to start doing and to do. We only came in May, but we're running pretty fast. The first thing I just want to talk about very quickly, which I know other speakers have talked about and Anneliese sort of set off, is about the housing crisis. So I know that many coastal towns really struggle with this because of where we are. You know, you can't build on the channel, so you're a bit stuck. We inherited a housing crisis from the Tories, whereby they had actually sold off our housing stock back in the 90s. And so we didn't have any social housing essentially. So what we're doing is we're putting in place with all our brown sites a social housing plan, so that when the developers come and say, gosh, we'd really love to develop your piece of land, we go, that's lovely, what are your plans for, you know, they always go affordable houses, don't they? But we're like, no, that's not actually affordable. We all know that. What is social housing? So that is something we can do as a Labour administration and put our foot down and say, we want social housing on those sites and we really need them. We've got a real problem with emergency and temporary accommodation here. Our budget in year this time is about 1.5 million in the red, and we only have a revenue budget of 14 million. So that's quite a substantive hole. We're going to be able to balance it because our officers have literally been looking down the back of sofas and balancing budgets. But a lot of that has come from emergency and temporary accommodation costs. And I know that is a problem. Well, it's a problem all over the country, but particularly in coastal areas, we're sending people out much further than we should be from Worthing. We're sending them up to Gatwick, too far. And actually, in some cases, I know they've gone up to Stoke-on-Trent and stuff, and that's absolutely appalling. It's appalling economically. It costs an absolute fortune. and much more importantly, it's appalling socially. We all know that. So I'll move on very quickly. We are also in the business of green. So we're the fairest and the greenest. So we're very into working with local businesses. When we first came in, they'd been used to working with Tories for years. They were like, oh no, here are these lefty Labour lot. Are they pro-business, etc.? Well, we are pro a local sustainable economy. For a local sustainable economy, we need good local businesses. We want really good green local businesses. So we've got a piece of land that's been decontaminated and can now be brought forward as an industrial estate. And as the Labour administration, we've said it's going to be a green industrial estate. So bring it on, green local businesses, come and get on this site. And there's some really exciting stuff that's coming forward, which is great. We are also, I mean, I know everybody is, but we have declared a climate emergency, and it's actually a climate and ecological emergency. So we've got a strategic principle paper coming forward, which is going to basically sort of try and push us as far as we can without sort of, sending us over into the red, to do as much as we can with this. And we've got two parts, and I know that speakers have already said, the blue and the green. It's really important when you're coast and country. And for us, we've got the Channel to the south, we've got the south down to the north. So it's really important that we address both. So in terms of blue, we've got Sussex Bay, which is a big ecological project, a big nature project about basically bringing back all the marine wildlife that's disappeared off the coast of Sussex Bay due to trawlers, etc. And very excitingly, I don't get very excited about seaweed, but I am excited about the fact that you can see kelp. Kelp is coming back to Sussex Bay. So I've got some great pictures of my fantastic environmental councillors holding kelp. I mean, I don't think they ever thought they'd do that, but it's really good news. And that's a really great positive thing that we're seeing. Similarly, I know that Jayne and others have talked about the fishermen, and Anneliese is very passionate about this. When we came into administration, the fishermen were almost defunct. The Tories had basically said, we're not interested, get out, we want to take your lockers away and put jet skis there. So we've basically said, no, we're not doing that. Keep your lockers. We really want to keep the local fishing industry here. So we've restored that relationship, and the local fishermen are staying here and they're selling their fish on the seashore, which is a great thing. In terms of green, we have the South Downs to the north of us, ironically, but there we go. And we are working with them to protect some of the land that we own that butts onto the South Downs, and we're rewilding that. We're looking at natural meadows there, and we're doing a lot of good work there. In our urban space, we always talk about, I don't know about you, but coastal strips sometimes look terrible because you've got blue to the one side, you've got green to the other, and they've got grey in the middle. So we came on and said, right, if we're going to be the greenest, we want to make sure all our green urban spaces are protected. We work with our communities to make sure they're used as community spaces, really important. And then the bits of public spaces like our town centre, which is grey now, we're not having that anymore. So we've got a huge wall currently in our town centre, which is a typical sort of, I call it a Woolworths wall, but I think that's because of the age I am. I always think Woolworths have those sort of awful red walls, and it's absolutely huge. And the developers who own, or the owners of that wall, have basically said, okay, what do you want to do with it, council? So we're going to have a huge green wall in our town centre, which I think is going to be really quite exciting. And yeah, so that's great. So we're doing stuff like that in terms of green and really working with
Becky?
Yeah, I've got
sorry. Yeah, can I wind you up?
Yeah, so absolutely. Sorry, so let me say the last thing about tourism. We're really aware of, we have to meet the needs of our residents because they're here all year round, but working to bring tourists in is a really important point for Worthing. We're just along the road from Brighton, but we have different things to offer. So a big part of what I do as leader is I've got the county portfolio with me because we're a two-tier authority. And we're working a lot on sustainable travel. So I'm a cyclist, not a very good one, but I cycle around, I don't use the car. And we are working on bringing cycling and pedestrian infrastructure to the forefront of our growth deal with the county. It's really, really important. And bus travel, I just want to finish on bus travel. So again, the Tories, our previous administration, did nothing with buses. They didn't talk to them. We are talking to both our bus companies. And actually this week, I'm taking Stagecoach along the way to Shoreham Port, where they are piloting hydrogen initiatives, but they're piloting them, I think, up in Glasgow because they've got Scottish grants, and maybe up in Liverpool. And I was like, why on earth? We're right next to Shoreham Port. Why on earth haven't we got a hydrogen pilot here? So that's just a few things we can do as a coastal Labour administration, and lots more to do. Sorry for going over time. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Becky. Lots of positive enthusiasm there. And finally, over to Steve, please.
Hi, that was genuinely inspirational, and Becky Cooper and her Labour group are a wonderful example of what activist Labour councils and councillors can achieve once they get control. And Worthing is a wonderful example of that. from sort of 0 councillors in 2017 to running the council, a fantastic story of political process. I just want to basically talk about why it's important for us to win the coastal communities back. In 1997, Labour won a majority, partly on the back of having won seats all around the coastal areas of the UK. And we've got to get back to that. And there's absolutely no reason why we shouldn't, because the levelling up agenda has sort of played into our hands. It's definitely for us to capture. And I think by emphasising levelling up in our coastal communities, we can reignite the enthusiasm that was there for Labour back in the 90s, and also capture, what are sometimes considered as being sort of Tory heartlands. But those communities really need us, because they are falling further and further behind in the sort of opportunity stakes nationally. So what does levelling up mean in the context of our coastal communities? It means there'll be a fairer distribution of services, there'll be a fairer distribution of facilities, and there'll be a fairer distribution of opportunities. And what we need to do is translate that into policies that work for people. And you've heard many very good examples of that from the previous speakers, not least Worthing, of course. What we need to do is ensure that we build back some of the things that have been lost. Public service has been in retreat from coastal communities since the 60s, not just the rail network, which is probably the best example and the earliest example of that, but in terms of cultural activity, housing, the provision of postal services, libraries, police services, colleges, and schools as well. Many of those communities have lost easy access to those. And because transportation is stretched at coastal community level, it's worse, and it makes it much worse for younger people. So we've had a flight of younger people from coastal areas into our towns and cities once they get some qualifications. And that means that the sort of intellectual energy and firepower is often gone missing. And we have to create sufficient opportunities in coastal areas to retain that important part of the dynamic workforce. Long-term strategy, but it's important for us to make statements about how it will work. It does mean higher levels of investment, and there's no doubt, if you look at the spend patterns over the last decade, there has been a flight of money as well. And so for all the Tories have promoted their town deals and levelling up funding, they still continue to take money away from coastal community areas and also the countryside. So we need to reverse that trend. We also need to have a policy that connects our coastal communities better with city regions and centres of population, because that's where services and facilities are currently concentrated. We have to provide policy approaches that enable people to access things that make life more enrich our lives and make it better, and that's going to be a very important thing for us as well. And I think if we do that and we link it into our political work, that of building stronger political parties in the coastal communities, then we've got a recipe for political success. So policy, getting the right policy, improving the quality of our organisation on the ground. Worthing, a very good example of that. Hastings, another very good example of that. And the work that comrades do down in Cornwall is actually very exciting too, because they're doing exactly the same thing there. So if we can do that, get the right policies, make the right pitch in terms of funding, then I think there's a great future for Labour in coastal communities. Those communities have fallen further and further behind. And the report I did for the House of Lords 3 years ago highlighted that, and the government's done very little on that agenda. So much so that I'm going to be doing a second report sometime next year, which will focus on the very issues of connectivity and investment that we need to focus on.
Hello. Councillor cheese and tuna, I'm not going at nice, so these coming.
Thanks, Steve. I'm not sure if you quite finished, but if it's all right for us to come back together for the questions, that will.
No, I had finished. That was it. I wanted to try and keep to time so there's more time for questions.
Thank you so much. If I could invite all the speakers to put their cameras on and return. So there's been a a range of different things discussed in the chat, so I'm going to try and bring some questions together. And I think one of the key ones is around devolution and the power that councils have in terms of having direct action. So if I can ask the speakers to consider, is it more, in terms of devolution, is it more important to ensure fair access to funding, or more important to have devolved powers? And within that, I just also want to join in a question that was raised around, as a specific example, around housing, and whether councils, how many of the solutions require kind of direct action by councils. And if I can come first to Jayne, because you were talking about Cornwall, that would be great. Thank you.
Yes, I've got huge amounts to say about this, because we've been campaigning down here in Cornwall on this type of issue for about, well, 8 to 10 years now. The first motion on it at Cornwall Council was in 2014, so it's something we've been doing a long time. I think really, if we were waiting for Westminster to do this, particularly this particular Westminster government, we'd be waiting forever. They've been talking about doubling council tax on second homes and the Levelling Up bill, but it seems to be getting delayed and delayed, and they're talking about reviewing things, but nothing ever happens. So I feel quite strongly that in some particular areas where things like second homes and holiday lets are an issue, that to the point where you do have massive cross-party agreement, that devolution would be helpful. We would like to look at a registration system and licensing for holiday lets. We would like to look at trebling council tax. We would like to look at planning use classes. Now, of course, that's a national thing. Could that kind of thing be devolved? And we even would be thinking, well, what about stamp duty? Could you have a look at stamp duty on second homes in a particular area? Could that be devolved? Tax raising powers. I know that all sounds quite radical, but it's something that in some areas would really make a massive difference, because I know there are housing crises everywhere, but in coastal areas particularly, it's just so dire. And I know that you were talking in Worthing about having to place people in emergency accommodation a long way away. We have something like 700 and something people in emergency accommodation. Some of them are in Cardiff and Plymouth, 3 hours away. So it's dire here. So we would be considering that we would have to take strong action, big action. I think devolving powers would give you the levers to do that relatively quickly.
Thanks so much, Jayne. Can I then bring in Becky?
Yeah, thanks, Pamela. So yeah, I mean, I would agree with Jayne. I mean, I think devolution for a variety of reasons would be a really healthy thing for this country. I think there are a lot of things that I think concentrating power centrally is generally not a very healthy thing for anywhere to do. And I think actually local governments, from what I've seen of local governments, having worked as an officer and then as a politician, local governments do have, the benefit of being in place and do understand, the needs of their residents. And that's a very powerful thing. And if you combine that with resources and actual authority, you can get an awful lot of stuff done. In terms of housing, I think I just put something in the chat. It is, as Jayne says, emergency and temporary accommodation, financially it's crippling us, and socially, emotionally, it's crippling our families. Like, I'm sure all councillors here and MPs actually have got, their inboxes are full of heartbreaking, appalling stories about, splitting families up, or, single families just not being able to afford to stay in their hometown. And yeah, Worthing is no different. The prices have priced out an awful lot of our local residents. And of course, as a council, we have a statutory duty to house people. Unfortunately, it's not a statutory duty to house people. We'd love to in Worthing, but we just simply don't have the space. So I would be very keen for a Labour government to really take a long, hard look at housing in this country, both private rental and public housing, and see what it is that we can actually do to sort of to use Steve's phrase, level up or sort of reduce the inequality. As far as the council goes for us now, the levers that we have available to us are around being creative with the land that we do have. We do have some land as a council, and also we are looking as properties come onto the market to see actually, is that appropriate? Could we repurpose that for emergency and temporary accommodation? And similarly, working with our county council, they do actually have quite a lot of assets, our county council, which in times gone by have sort of appeared on the commercial market. Well, actually, we've now just come to an understanding that if they want to dispose of their assets, please come and ask us first, because we might be able to make good use of them. So social housing for us is a real priority. And again, I put that in the chat. And there are ways and means we can find to start building social housing here again. Interestingly, we are a Labour council, but we've got a Conservative council to our left and our right, to Arran and Ada, but they are interested in amalgamating with us to make a footprint that will be big enough to make a social housing and an HRA that is actually economically viable, because we know obviously, you know, once you've built your social housing, you have your upkeep. So I think there are things that we can do positively in the current environment, but as Jayne and others say, until there is a change of government to make a really proper, you know, a really good sustainable change, I think that does need to happen nationally, and I'd be all for devolution of us, you know, substantive powers as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Becky. Steve, I wonder if you might come in with your perspective on that. Sorry, you're on mute, Steve.
The test is to bring government closer to people and devolve powers to the lowest possible level that are appropriate and where there's capacity. One of the things I'm very keen on seeing is us do more with local town councils, so that town councils have more powers as well. I mean, in Cornwall, for instance, it's a unitary authority. So certainly there are things that could be devolved more to the unitary authority, but then I think the towns are important in Cornwall. It's got 20 sort of major towns, I think, roughly speaking, and there's no reason why they shouldn't have more responsibility. And that then puts power back into the hands of people closest to where the services need to be. So I'm very keen on that. I'm also very keen on promoting strong models of leadership, because people like Becky, for instance, as city leader or town leader in her case, can help shape their communities, but only if they've got the scope and the opportunity to do it. So it's not appropriate for everywhere to have a sort of strong mayoral structure, but I do think that our city regions are now getting closer to a form of government where powers are properly devolved to the right level, and where you can make big strategic decisions, particularly on transport, which does require you know, a rather more regional and strategic perspective. But for our coastal communities, they have to be better connected, and it's that connectivity, whether it's in infrastructure or digital, that is going to be the opportunity for them, particularly as we try and seek to grow the economy in those places as well.
Thanks very much, Steve. I don't know whether Peter and Anneliese have got things they particularly want to contribute to this question. You do? Okay, Anneliese, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just relatively briefly, if I may, please do tune in if people are able to the launch of Gordon Brown's Commission on the Future of the UK, which is actually on Monday, because I think that people will see reflected in the work that he's been doing many of the kinds of issues that we've just covered in our discussion just now. I can't go into exactly what's in the report. I'm one of the 12 commissioners for the report. All I can really say at this stage is that I certainly share a lot of the frustrations that have just been expressed. Gordon does as well. And I think people will see in that report something that's really quite exciting. You know, I think we often talk within Labour about wanting to devolve that power outwards. We don't want to get tied up in knots around, you know, different institutions, all that kind of thing. I think the way that Gordon has worked really does show that there are ways of going with the grain of some of the excellent kind of work that we've just been talking about, and in doing so, making sure that local people have got that power and that control. So we know, actually, interestingly, that when people are asked whether they want more money going into their communities or to have more control over the money that's already going in, they actually want to focus on control, interestingly. So we need to deliver that as Labour. So please do check out what's going to be released on Monday. I think there's a lot of very exciting stuff in that.
Thanks very much. Peter, did you have anything to add?
Very, very briefly. People have basically spoken about all the key things here. But of course, you have devolved powers. You've got to have the cash that goes with it. You can't have, you know, it's not an either or situation. And also, who has that power? I was a great believer in actually looking at the possibility of regional assemblies some years ago, which would add another almost ridiculous tier of government, or would it? You know, you've got to think about accountability. Comes back to accountability to Westminster, and I think Jayne was talking about, you know, we're waiting for government to sort things out. When are they going to decree that every single house built in this country has got to have solar panels on it? You know, there's a simple answer to a solution which affects everybody everywhere. Also, building brownfield land. I speak very parochially. We've got a large development waiting to be built here. It's been waiting for about 8 years, and it's still waiting. So instead, we're building an estate on the outskirts of the town on green land. You know, those are the things which people can get a move on. And I think you mentioned, I think finally, this thing about council tax on second homes and things. That's supposed to be coming. What I'm surprised at is why the government aren't getting a move on with that, because that would give direct income to local councils that the government would have to fund. You know, it's a no-brainer. But, you know, there are so many things waiting that we want the government to do, and they're prevaricating on the significant things that we want done. And thanks, Anneliese, for reminding you about Gordon's thing on Monday. I'm looking forward to that myself, but thank you.
Thanks so much, Peter. So we'll just take one more question before handing over to Anneliese to sum up. And I wanted to pick up on, Anneliese, you mentioned around the robust net zero and nature test for policies. So a question about how the panel think that this could be applied in local government, and whether there's any documents or information outlining this test that could be used at local levels. I'm not sure if anyone wants to indicate if they would like to go first. A moment to think. Maybe Anneliese, would you like to comment on the test?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we heard some great examples actually from Becky around what they're already doing to make sure that there is that commitment to much more biodiversity locally, you know, even in the very constrained and difficult circumstances that local councils work within at the moment. I share kind of many of the frustrations people just talked about before. I mean, Peter mentioned some of them around the planning process. You know, we were, when we were in government, getting to a far stronger position around those net zero aspects, but also talking about improving biodiversity in our housing stock. You know, I have a campaigner, I know it's just one issue, but, you know, he's pointed out, well, shouldn't we see a standard in new build hedgehog holes, for example? He's managed to persuade one of the biggest house builders to do that. We need to be having national conversations around these kinds of pro-biodiversity measures, where there's actually, you know, a lot of strong support coming from business to be pushing in that direction, as well as from often Labour-run local authorities and Labour groups. So, you know, a lot that we can be doing together around that, I think. And when we do work together, of course, we improve people's quality of life massively, as well as having that positive impact on biodiversity and our environment more generally.
Thanks, Anneliese. Steve, I can see your hand there.
Well, I think certainly from my time in local government, and I was a sort of leader for 13 years or whatever, what we tried to do then was sort of write environmental policy and strategy through all of our activities. So, you know, promoting environmental audits, using the supply chain, and setting key targets. Now, there's a balance to be struck between how much of that target setting central government should set and how much it should be set locally. But if you can get it right, then you can set your local authority on the path to achieving sort of net zero goals. And nowhere is that more important, obviously, than with transport and in rural areas in particular, because there are often long distances between centres of population, and we've become overly dependent on cars, whereas we need to get back to a more sort of socially responsible network of rural transport services, rail and bus. So very important to set standards and benchmarks, and very important that you try and take the local population with you, because that's really key to embedding these things long term. But it's got to be sort of fact-based and delivered in a way that people understand and can identify with. So audit's very key, very important to set out standards.
Thanks, Steve. Becky?
Yeah, so just building really on what Anneliese and Steve said, and just sort of saying what might be useful from Worthing. And I know we share best practice. So we've our public Worthing cabinet on Monday, we're actually bringing, maybe January actually, sorry, that's economic principles on Monday, which is community wealth building, which is also really
We've just lost you there. Oh no, you're back.
Oh, sorry, it's still there. Yeah, my internet connection apparently is unstable. Excellent. Sorry, so I'm really happy to share that. It's just, and it is best practice, and the officer and the cabinet member that have written it have really gone hell for leather on net zero, sort of trying to, you know, improve what it is that's gone before. And in terms of just infrastructure, it was really interesting what Steve was saying about taking people along with you. You really have to, like, we've won the council by taking people with us. So, and I've said this a million times before, but people who have voted Tory their whole lives voted for us because we spent time talking to them and found those common themes, which actually, thank goodness, you know, we chose the right party, because Labour is the party of decent common humanity. And actually, for me as a public health consultant, we're evidence-based. So I can say, look, this is going to work. You're going to have a safer town. If your priority is to have a safer town, then if we can, you know, make sure that people who are behaving badly actually have some support, then you're going to have a safer town. So taking people along with you is really, really important. And in terms of climate emergency stuff and the infrastructure, we are talking about, and this normally would get the Tory hackles up, a 20's plenty. So actually looking at residential roads in Worthing and having a 20-mile-an-hour limit, because building cycle lanes is really, really expensive, but getting cars to slow down and prioritise other people on the road is a lot cheaper. But in terms of behavioural change, it's really quite hard. But if you start talking about road safety first, so if you start talking about being safe, and, you know, making sure that you are safe in your car and people walking are safe, particularly older people, because a lot of older people vote Tory, but they're like, oh, hang on a second, the Labour Party want us to be safe. So I think bringing people with you for the climate emergency, the net zero stuff, which can be quite existential, and people do put their head in the sand, and I understand. But if as a local authority you find those things, that the language and the way of saying things that really works, then I think you can bring people along with you, and you can have a green town that actually Tories, Labour, old, young, you know, all sorts of diversity, they all buy into, because they get what they need from it. So yeah, the 20's plenty thing is going to be interesting to see. Last time Worthing did it, it was absolute uproar, and all the old Tories said, you know, we want to drive our fast Jags or whatever. But this time, I think we can talk about road safety. We can talk about, you know, making sure that they are safe roads. And wouldn't you like it? You know, wouldn't you like to come out of your house and not have, you know, some person whipping past you at 45 miles an hour? So yeah, I really think bringing people along with you for net zero is important. And then for local authority, then it does open up for you, because then as an administration, you know, you're going to get voted in again because you've got people with you.
Thanks so much, Becky. I'm afraid we need to be rounding up. So if I can pass over to Anneliese to sum up, and I wonder if in that you could also have a think about how we can help frontbenchers and the National Policy Forum to talk of and use examples of towns and villages more often as we develop our policy, if that's all right.
Of course, and yeah, just first of all wanted to say that this has been such a fascinating conversation, both with the panelists, who I think have offered us so many exciting ideas and insights, but also in the chat as well. And there's some really, really great councillors and activists up and down the country who are in that chat. So big thanks for what you've been saying as well. Now, I think it's really important that we adopt a completely different mindset around coastal communities and rural communities as well. And I think what this conversation has shown is that Labour does have that different mindset. You know, we view our coastal and countryside communities as communities that are going to be key to the new economy, that we need to see to that stronger, fairer, greener economy, that we want to see actually growth in those communities, that we're completely against what I've often felt has been kind of deficit model around those communities coming from Conservative governments, that they pretty much view those areas as places where, yes, perhaps people might live, often much better off people, but not as areas where people are likely to work as well, and as areas where so often young people have to move away, because not just the jobs aren't there, but the affordable housing isn't either. And we do have that very different vision. Please do contribute, as was just mentioned, to the National Policy Forum around this. We are just starting that new, well, we're kind of 3 years into the cycle now, but with a new membership of the National Policy Forum. Do check out who your MPF reps are, you know, do get in contact with them. Make sure that your views are feeding into that. And, you know, also make sure that when we have those great examples of Labour delivery in coastal communities and also in our rural areas, you know, please do let me know as party chair. I'm always keen to showcase them. We've been running what we've called a Labour Work series with some brilliant examples of Labour delivery. Make sure they're passed on to us. And that includes, of course, our town councillors and our parish councillors as well. We're all one Labour family, and one Labour family that's very strong in many of our coastal and country communities too. So please, please blow your own trumpet. We need to do that a lot more, and just all power to your elbows if that's not mixing too many metaphors. Thanks again for all being part of this conference and for inviting me to it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anneliese. Rousing words at the end there. Thank you to all the panelists in this session. If you're sticking around, there are more conversations happening in the chat, and I'm sure if you're available, you'll be able to contribute to those as well. We're going to take a break now, and we'll be back at 1:10 past. Thank you very much.